Hello everyone, this is part 18 of What If Naruto Was Madara's Brother, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Tsunade along with her clansmen and allies alike had never in their wildest dreams imagined a day would come when they would be fighting side by side alongside Uchihas and their allies. But that day had come, and tonight their 3,000-strong combined force was currently charging towards the defenders of the strongest city of the world. Whatever she may think of the Uchiha, she couldn't deny the fact that their roars were as powerful as the dragons they claimed to descend from. It was enough to make the royal defenders flinch as they formed a great defensive line. Her sharp eyes didn't miss the dozen ninjas at the front, followed by heavy infantry in the middle and skilled archers at the back. Since the streets were narrow, many of the ninjas had decided to take up to the roofs, but their enemy had also positioned their own ninjas on the opposite side. It was as if the daimyo had trained his forces for fighting against ninja clans. Whatever the case, her eyes were now fixed on the one leading the charge. Riding atop his giant fox and dressed in his golden armor with dawn in his hand, Naruto Uchiha did strike as an intimidating warrior. He was quite far ahead of his army leading the charge, with his Kinsguard members right beside him mounted on their own horses. The enemy either considered the group foolish or as a hail of burning fire arrows were launched by the royal archers. Tsunade didn't miss the seals carefully written on those arrows, and she had a feeling they were meant to make the arrows L shinobi armor. Yet Naruto and his group charged forward despite the hail of arrows descending down upon them. It was at that moment when the bee fox that roared while looking up at the army of arrows, and not a second later that entire volley was shattered into metallic dust. The fox again gave a mighty roar, this time aimed right at the front line of the ninja defenders who were going through a set of hand seals. Tsunade's eyes nearly popped out from her sockets when she saw nearly 24 men and women go flying away from the force of that roar. The front line had cracked. In the meantime, Naruto and his squad had finished their hand seals. Fire style, fire flame missile. All 6 Uchiha launched wild and searing flames from their mouth that took the shape of fire missile that tore clean through the enemy ranks, burning unfortunate royal soldiers that were caught in its grasp. What was more important was the attack was solely focused and spared any nearby buildings from catching fire. With their frontline ninja defenders sent flying away because of the fox, the royal army was left open and faced the brutal charge of the Kinsguard. The fox unleashed 9 long tails from its body, shattering the nearest poor souls before sending them flying away as if they were annoying flies. The remaining Kinsguard members charged after the beast, see down any royal defenders of the broken front line lucky enough to survive the beast's wrath. By now the allied forces had reached the battlefield and clashed head-on with the 6 ninjas of the daimyo who valiantly fought on. Their courage might have worked if they had more numbers and if they were not facing 2 of the strongest clans in the world and their allies. Tsunade herself launched a mighty punch on a ninja wide enough to attack her. In his defense, the man raised his sword and was surprised when the weapon shattered against her punch, allowing her chakra-coated hand to tear his sea apart. His eyes widened in horror just before he was sent halfway across the city, where he splattered against the walls and splashed into hundreds of tiny pieces. A nasty grin arrived on her face as she watched every mercenary ninja of the daimyo shiver on the fate of their comrade. Even the Uchihas and their allies gulped at the sheer power of her fist. Instead of basking in the looks of awe and fear, Tsunade's sharp eyes narrowed when she saw 3 large armies made up of thousands of soldiers descending towards their position from 3 sides of the capital. "They are trying to box us in. Itama," she yelled. Her brother had just finished burying his sword in one of the enemy Kanoiki's end when he turned at her voice. On seeing what Tsunade was pointing, he grimaced. Tsunade watched her shy and reserved brother actually steel himself before glancing at his widely distributed troops. While it was true that she was the second in command of this army, Tsunade badly wanted her brother to regain his lost confidence. After his defeat against Naruto, his reputation had taken a severe beating in the clan, and this was his chance to regain his lost honor back. She was happy to give him this chance but would step forward if he couldn't do it. Fortunately, seeing Naruto's valiant charge had ignited some of the lost fire in the Senju boy's heart as he raised his sword. "Senjus, with me," he yelled. Despite his past defeats, Tsunde's clansmen followed her brother's command and joined him as he personally led the charge against the army coming from the town square. Tsunade looked around the battlefield to gauge the situation. She was surprised to see Naruto and his squad along with some help from 100 Uchihas and Shimuras had nearly annihilated half of the enemy to the front. The Khan's guard had formed a protective circle around their leader as they all advanced forward, see down any and everyone with their swords. Her gaze shifted towards the man she was supposed to marry and she realized the tales about his prowess were not false. Naruto had dismounted from his fox's back, allowing the beast to run forward and wreak havoc. In the meantime, the second son of Tajima was channeling wind chakra through his ancestral weapon. Dozens upon dozens of royal guards had their armors Anywho, tried to attack Naruto from his blind spot, got their heads chopped off through the blades of the Khan's guard, the most lethal of them being Shisui and Itachi Uchiha. That enemy flank was as good as M. Looking elsewhere, she saw two armies were still charging towards her positions from the markets and merchant district. She had roughly 1,000 warriors left with her since the remaining were currently busy fighting for Atama and a few for Naruto's side. Kenji, one of her old bodyguards, instantly stepped beside her. Currently in his 30s, this man had protected her when she was a babe and even now he was there for her when she needed him. Take 800 of our forces and stop the forces approaching from the merchant district. There could be ninjas among them, ordered Tsunade. Yes, princess, but what about the other force? Wouldn't you be outnumbered? I can easily see 2,000 warriors among them and you'll barely have 200 ninjas on your side. And the two Namikaze fighters who are sworn to Uchihas, warned Kenji worriedly. Like Naruto said, we need to work together, besides I have a plan. Now go, commanded Tsunade, her voice leaving no room for any doubts or protests. Kenji flinched but did give her a dutiful bow before rallying the troops she had ordered and running towards the enemy approaching from the merchant district. Rest of you, with me, yelled Tsunade. The Namikaze fighters looked at each other first before glancing at Naruto, who was busy in his own battle. What probably made him follow a Senju was the presence of a dozen Senjus actually fighting beside Naruto. Tsunade grinned when they joined her as she led the charge, her hands already blurring through a set of hand seals. Summoning jutsu. The enemy army stopped in their tracks when a massive slug appeared right before them. They all glanced up at the blonde Senju woman standing on top of the creature, who stared back at them coldly. Shields up, yelled the royal commander. The capital defenders joined together and raised their metal shields over their heads as a few soldiers broke from their ranks. Katsuyu, fire, yelled Tsunade. The giant slug took in a deep breath before shooting off a massive barrage of acid from her mouth. However, before the lethal attack could hit the enemy, the few of their soldiers that had broken rank actually turned out to be ninjas who quickly s their hands on the ground. Earth style, earth wall. Tsunade snarled when multiple layers of earth walls rose from the ground, covering the entire royal army contingent from the rain of acid fire. Katsuyu poured more of the lethal liquid, but as soon as she broke through one layer of wall, another was there to replace the lost one. They are trying to tire her out. Tsunade glanced at her own smaller forces and watched many Namikaze maintain a safe distance from the acid rain. But instead of standing idly, they were all hammering multiple explosive kunai on the enemy walls, but their attacks were having even less effect than Katsuyu's. She ordered her battle partner to stop her attack and waited for the enemy to take the bait. They didn't. The layers of earth wall were still standing strong despite the best efforts of Tsunade's forces. Once her forces were tired, the 2,000 warriors and ninjas would emerge from that shell and s them with sheer numbers. Tsunade charged forward with AM battlecry as she jumped off from Katsuyu's head, going straight towards the earth walls. In the air, she backflipped herself, making her chakra-coated right leg s at the center of the enemy defense formation. Crack. Several large cracks appeared all over the wall as Tsunade s into the structure with her entire force. Snarling furiously, she attacked the structure with her furious fists, making more and more holes appear everywhere. Katsuyu, breach. Her summon didn't give any verbal reply but instead unleashed several smaller versions of slugs from her body that Tsunade quickly caught in her arms. Without hesitation, she placed the creatures across many of the new holes in the earth wall as they all started to pour acid from their B. Even if the enemy could reform more and more walls to protect themselves, the temperature within the structure would increase very rapidly. It wouldn't be long before they would be forced to break out or else from the insufferable heat. Tsunade jumped off the wall and commanded her troops to take to the nearby roofs. When they were all clear, she performed a set of hand seals before her hands on the ground. Earth-style, star crater. The entire ground started sinking lower and lower as thousands of royal soldiers screamed in panic. Tsunade saw her troops had taken up positions across the rooftops and were now staring at the sinking ground. "Katsuyu, flood them now," yelled Tsunade urgently. The slug unleashed another massive river of acid from its mouth, flooding the core of the sinking ground first before focusing on making the escaping borders full of acid. Tsunade forced her summon to stop as she saw the enemy walls cracking now that the heat was unbearable for the royalists. They were about to be cooked alive from the heat of the smaller Katsuyus unleashing acid in their cracked walls. The walls cracked open urgently as thousands of panicked soldiers rushed out to save themselves. To their horror, they were now standing in the middle of a large crater full of acid, and the only way outside was crawling up towards the far street. All around them, Namika's shinobi were waiting for them at the nearest rooftops. Tsunade steeled herself when she looked at the Namika's troops and then at the horrified royalists. Fire! Hundreds of shuriken and kunai were launched at the royalists. Those soldiers were yet to split up properly and as such were badly hit by the volley of weapons launched by accurate Namika's ninjas. If that was not enough, Katsuyu's attack was the death blow. Tsunade closed her eyes when her summon unleashed massive quantities of acid on the trapped royalists. The trapped souls screamed in horror and agony as their skin started to melt before the very eyes. Those at the center of their formation were the first to burn alive. The few who managed to run towards the steep hill of the crater couldn't climb much farther as the Namika's fighters all from their superior positions on rooftops with the help of kunai barrages. Long and painful minutes passed as Tsunade watched the entire enemy army before her very eyes. To their credit, the royalists fought to the last man, and even in the face of annihilation they continued to struggle and try to get themselves out of the death trap. Many would call their actions folly, but Tsunade knew they were for someone they believed in. A massive river of acid had now flooded across the entire crater, and most of the royalists were floating lifelessly in the liquid, with many of the be dissolving slowly. The stench was horrible, with most of the having been killed by acid first before the kunai of the Namika's warriors took their lives. Her eyes widened when a last group of royal soldiers charged straight towards her under the leadership of their commander. The officer had third-degree burns and his sea was marred with kunai, yet there was and determination in his eyes. The Namika's ninjas reacted quickly and unleashed another rain of arrows towards the enemy group. It was the royal soldiers who valiantly stepped in between, taking the blows aimed for their commander and slumped lifelessly into the acid river. Tsunade's eyes widened when the enemy commander reached the edge of the crater. He was almost dissolving into the acid with half his legs gone, not to mention the continuous barrage of kunai hitting all over his body. The roar unleashed by the S-man sent shivers down Tsunade's heart, leaving her paralyzed as the man launched a mighty spear at her with full force. The Senju's eyes widened and she evaded the incoming weapon in the nick of time, only to realize it was never meant for her. The spear actually sailed high in the air before exploding right beside Katsuyu's left eye. The creature screamed as the explosive laced on the spear unleashed a mighty shockwave along with flames that consumed the entire eye along with half of the creature's face. Screaming in agony, it vanished in a puff of smoke, much to Tsunade's horror. Her eye turned towards the man who had hurt her friend and saw the S-man grinning at her defiantly. He had now sunk to his knees into the acid river, with his body a picture of kunai and shuriken. Long live the Daimyo! The man exploded himself with the help of hidden explosives inside his tattered uniform. While the explosion itself was small, the shockwave was wide, sending brutal tremors across half of the capital. Tsunade yelled in horror when dozens of Namikas fell from the rooftops after suddenly losing their balance due to horrific shockwave. Their screams teared her heart as they were all consumed in the acid river while they tumbled inside the crater, joining the royal soldiers. Victory was hers, but the enemy had not gone down without a fight. Atama Senju was chasing after the royal army alongside his own forces. It was a bizarre scenario which he had never imagined to happen. Instead of facing them openly, the royals had decided to run back towards the vicinity of the daimyo's castle. Atama had no choice but to follow or risk allowing him an opportunity to set another ambush. Looking at the daimyo's castle made Atama wonder about the safety of his brother. Hashirama was the strongest fighter he had ever seen, and he had almost 500 fighters helping him. Still, he could not help but worry for his brother and dearly wished they had Yamanaka in their forces right now, if only to help him learn if his brother was safe. He was disrupted from his thoughts when the royal army reached the gates and suddenly adopted a Tetsudo-like formation. Looking closely, he realized there was a thin barrier that would stop any jutsu being fired by his shinobi from long distance. The daimyo had went to great lengths to make his fortress very difficult to be attacked by shinobi from the outside. Still, to figure out such a strategy was not the work of any normal civilian commander. Atama looked at his own forces and saw he had roughly around 1,800 men with him, the remaining were away fighting for his sister and Naruto. The royal army had roughly the same number of forces, but still an uneasy feeling was emerging in Atama's gut. He cursed out loud when nearly 100 hothead Inuzukas charged forward without any warning. Atama yelled for them to come back, but it was too late as suddenly dozens of archers appeared on the castle walls. It was a trap. The Inuzuka force realized too late their own folly and paid for it with their lives as they royal archers mercilessly shredded them with hundreds of arrows. The royal army cheered as every single Inuzuka and their ninja dogs was butchered. Suddenly, two of the other gates of the royal castle opened up and Atama stiffened. From the eastern gate emerged hundreds of cavalrymen. Judging from their armor, they were veteran samurai trained to fight against shinobi. From the western gate, emerged two entire platoons of massive war elephants with dozens of archers mounted on top of the beasts. If that was not enough, from Atama's rear emerged hundreds of civilian fighters armed with light swords, axes, and whatever weapon they could find. The defenders of the city were out for the bee of those who had threatened their leader's rule. The shinobi force buckled and started taking whatever little cover they could find as volley after volley of arrows started raining down on them. Atama was trapped between the expertly crafted hammer and anvil of the enemy forces. Looking up at the castle walls, he was surprised to find a Nara commander looking down at him calmly. The Naras were said to be the best strategists in the elemental nations, and their entire clan was loyal to the fire daimyo for generations. Now they were repaying that loyalty when the daimyo needed it most. "We've got no chance," yelled several allied shinobi. Atama had to think fast or risk the annihilation of his entire force. If they were here, it wouldn't matter how strong Naruto or Tsunade were, because they would be butchered against this organized army led by a capable Nara commander. Just looking at the charging war elephants stopped his heart several times. The beasts didn't care if they stepped over houses of nobles or crushed a few unlucky souls that got in their way. Their wide and dangerous tusks making quick work of any human that had the audacity to stop them. The royal army at the gate was slowly marching forward, leaving even less room for Atama's forces to maneuver. There were no high buildings nearby which the shinobi could use to escape, only small but lavish houses that could be easily destroyed by the war elephants. His army was wavering and none of his family members were here to save him. It was just him. He didn't know from where that courage came, but he looked at his fighters. "To me," he yelled valiantly. Despite the dire situation, hundreds of senjus rallied around him, followed by many sarutobi and few Inuzuka that were still left. The few Uchihas clearly didn't want to follow him anymore, but seeing there was no other choice they did the same. Uchihas use fire to break the cavalry charge. Inuzukas, you'll charge with me towards the gates, drawing the attention of the archers away from the Uchihas. Senjus and sarutobis, block the elephants with earth and water attacks. He unleashed his sword and took a deep breath before staring at the heavily organized royal army closing in and the archers ready at the castle walls. If this plan was to work, then he had to take the lead as a true leader would. "Follow me." Atama was the first to charge forward, and the brave roars of the Inuzuka fighters told him that they were following his lead. Maybe it was the sight of him charging bravely at the enemy army or some newfound motivation. Atama was glad to see his forces regain some of their vigor and run to carry out the objectives he had assigned to him. He couldn't think about failure right now as he finished performing a set of hand seals. Lightning style, lightning stag. From his fingers, Atama unleashed gigantic beams of lightning that soon took the form of several massive stags with tall horns of the same element. The Senju were known for their fury, and there was no other animal Atama found more befitting to represent his rage. The beasts roared and charged forward, cackling devastating lightning bolts across the barrier protecting the royal forces at the gate. Within seconds, it shattered and the stags charged clean through the defensive enemy. The beasts were not alone as Atama heard another yell. Gatsuga. The Inuzuka force and their ninja dogs joined together to launch devastating tornado-like attacks that drilled massive holes in the enemy formation and butchered hundreds of royal soldiers on the spot. Those who survived the clash were soon being torn apart by the hungry ninja dogs. Their master's son joined them in the tearing apart enemy forces and taking vengeance for the of their comrades. Atama blocked a sword from a royal soldier and batted away a spear aimed at his ribs. Turning around in a half-circle, he instantly spilled open the guts of a dozen royal soldiers that tried to corner him down. His eyes narrowed when he spotted several Inuzuka dogs and their masters getting down by the heavy fire from the royal archers on the walls. With a mighty roar, he jumped high in the air and unleashed a hail of kunai right at the castle walls. He grinned in satisfaction when the explosive tags on the kunai went off, shredding a third of the castle walls and burying many archers alive. Several others were caught up in the blast and had their limbs torn off. Some were caught on fire and were now running around in panic, spreading the element among the disorganized comrades, creating even more havoc. Atama was relieved on seeing the Uchihas forming a single line against the approaching heavy cavalry of samurai. Their hands moved in sync as they all unleashed their attack at the same time. Fire style, fire flame wall. A monstrous tidal wave of fire was unleashed by the Uchiha that roared furiously as it charged right towards the incoming cavalry. It burned houses and even the castle's walls, taking down many more archers in its rush to reach its target. The horses panicked on seeing the approaching fire and kicked off dozens of riders from their backs. The samurai in the middle and rear had to instantly rein their own beasts as their front line panicked and collapsed. They started to turn around in order to flee from the raging fire wall, but were too late as the flames consumed them in a matter of seconds. Atama found himself cheering alongside the Uchihas as the entire samurai cavalry was consumed in flames. The dragon warriors roared before rejoining the battle at the gates, helping the Inuzuka the diminishing royal foot soldiers. The archers on the wall were mostly thrown off the walls, buried alive, or injured. The few still left alive were bravely doing their best to crush the enemy forces but were not able to make any decisive impact. The Senju commander continued fighting against his enemies in close combat while wondering about the plan of battle. Initially, it was agreed upon by both factions that only the daimyo's family should be secretly captured and the royal castle taken over. That would have been enough to pacify the thousands of defenders in the city, for they would not attack until the enemy had their liege lord hostage. But Hashirama pointed out that while the defenders would not attack, they would surely surround the ninja forces, preventing them from leaving or anyone from coming to their help. Leaving those soldiers alone also posed the risk of them calling for reinforcements and making the common civilians rise up in revolt. No ninja army could stand against more than 150,000 civilians and nearly 9,000 highly trained soldiers. It was why it was decided to not only capture the royal family but also subdue the city garrison that would allow the ninjas to assume complete control over the capital. But this plan had several fatal flaws. The most important one being the ninjas had underestimated the skill, tenacity, and loyalty of not only the city garrison but also those of the civilians loyal to the daimyo, and were now finding themselves trapped. Second error was the fact that the daimyo had not only prepared his city but also his forces in fighting against trained ninja forces. The presence of the Nara commander only added further problems for the ninjas. His intervention could be the reason as to why the allied ninja army's flag was yet to fly from the top of the castle. Third mistake was the presence of hidden special forces in the form of samurai cavalry and war elephants, which the daimyo had been expertly able to conceal from the ninjas for a long time. While the samurai cavalry was vanquished, Atama could only watch in horror as the war elephants continued their charge despite facing massive tidal waves of water launched by the Senju. The Sarutobi warriors uprooted the entire ground with the intent to make the elephants panic, but instead the beast madly charged forward without any thought for self-preservation. It was then the Senju commander noticed the shadows stretching from top of the beast to its legs. The ones controlling the beasts were now revealed to be Nara shadow binders supported by squads of archers. Hundreds of ninjas were either crushed alive or sent sailing away halfway across the city as the war elephants into their lines. They were moving more rapidly and wildly than any animal of their kind ever had, which was another proof of the Nara's fine control. Whatever Senju or Sarutobi ninjas lucky enough to survive the rage of the beasts found themselves getting by the hail of arrows launched by the enemy archers on elephant backs. Atama grabbed a nearby spear and made 10 earth clones of himself quickly. In front of his eyes, hundreds of his fighters were horrible deaths. They had followed him into this peril, and as their commander it was his responsibility to step up. No more running away, no more cowering in the shadow of his siblings. He had to act. The young Senju and his clone force charged forward and took up positions several feet away from the charging elephants. The Naras saw him instantly and focused their entire force in his direction. Atama took in a deep breath and controlled his nerves as he commanded his clones to raise their spears while he did the same himself. "Steady," yelled Atama, as the beasts crushed a few more of his men. "Hold," he commanded again, as his own clones gulped because the beasts were just about to reach them. "Take down the riders." No sooner had he given the command, Atama threw his chakra-coated spear right at the one who he assumed was the Nara officer leading this charge. The enemy ninja, realizing the threat, instantly moved out of the way but in turn lost his control, making his elephant crash against the one on his right. It was as if a tidal wave had been unleashed as one after another the war elephants started colliding with each other. They all gracelessly fell to the ground, burying most of their riders including the Nara officers. The few who managed to remain standing were taken down by the hail of the chakra spears launched by the clone army of Atama. The ninja forces and royals alike were stunned at the display of valor and skill of one Senju. Atama was not done as he unleashed his sword and valiantly charged towards the downed beasts, intending to make sure they and their masters never rose again. The surviving Senju and Sarutobi were more than inspired by their leader's courage and followed after him. By the time they finished off the elephants and their riders, Atama found himself facing another grave problem. He grit his teeth in anger and frustration when he saw the Nara commander of the castle had personally arrived outside the gates. With his shadow binding, he had already took hold over the bee of at least 10 Uchiha and 3 Inuzuka along with the dogs. He was making him attack Atama's remaining forces, creating more confusion and allowing the remaining royal foot soldiers and archers to hammer down more casualties. "Let's kill the bastard fast," proposed one of the Senjus. "Before he falls he'll make sure to butcher the Uchiha and Inuzuka under his control," warned a Sarutobi frustratedly. "Who cares? Let those dragon bastards yelled another Senju. "What about the Inuzuka? They are our allies. Are you craven enough to let them willingly?" shouted another. Mayhem broke across his divided forces, with each ninja proposing more and more radical suggestions. But if one thing was common was the fact that for the price of the Nara commander's life, the Senjus and Sarutobis were willing to every Uchiha in their force. This was exactly the kind of scenario Naruto had warned them about. One which could threaten their entire mission and get them all killed. "Shut up and follow my lead," barked Atama furiously, never having used such a tone in his entire life. But right now he didn't care. His men flinched on seeing the raw fury blazing in his eyes. He couldn't believe the nerve of his own men. There were Namika's fighters currently fighting beside his sister. If those Uchiha bannermen could put aside the differences and actually work side by side with Tsunade herself, then these men had no reason to betray their allies. Hashirama would never forgive him if he let their allies needlessly. Most of all, Atama could never forgive himself if he didn't stop this. When he charged towards the last enemy forces, the Nara commander immediately noticed him and made sure to send every Uchiha and Inuzuka under his control straight towards Atama. A sly grin came on the Senju's face as he decided to take a page out of Naruto's book. Having personally experienced the power behind this move, he knew how much he needed to apply his power. When the Uchihas and Inuzuka fighters got close to him, Atama fired bolts of lightning from his hands, striking every one of them in non-vital body parts but with enough force to shock their brain. The Nara commander grimaced when his pawns fell unconscious with minor burns, the shock to their neural system enough to make them black out. Naruto had used more than a dangerous amount on Atama. Fortunately for the young dragon, his former enemy was not that vengeful, or his people would be tonight. The two armies clashed against each other as Atama reached the Nara commander. He was older than him by at least a few years, and his face was marred by nasty scars which proved he had faced more war than Atama had years. Atama knew the Nara would force him to engage in long-range combat in order to try to capture him with his shadow binding technique. His only option was to get close quickly and finish off the man. Just when he was about to move, his eyes widened in shock. One of the Inuzuka dogs leapt out of nowhere and brutally tore apart the head of the enemy commander in a gory manner. The headless body slumped gracelessly to the ground. The remnants of the royal forces could only watch in despair as their commander was brutally in the chaos. If that was not enough to break their morale, the cacophony of war horns and a very familiar war cry shattered their last courage. Fire and be. The war cries could be heard even so far away from the gates because they were being yelled out by thousands of bee warriors. Atama had known this could happen, but he never actually imagined those bee dragons would come through. Whatever miracle happened, it was the death nail for the royals because Madara Uchiha was here with the entire Uchiha army. Tajima watched his eldest son dismount from his horse and was soon surrounded by various clan heads. The Uchiha patriarch could have taken the lead, but their people had chosen Madara as their Hokage. This was his son's moment to show their people that their faith was not misplaced. They were all stunned when they received the urgent message from Naruto stating that conflict was imminent, as the daimyo had been already making steps to take Naruto hostage the moment the Uchihas refused. Madara marched his entire army hard and fast to the capital before the royals could lay a hand on his last sibling. It was a mistake. Tajima glanced at the vast army and saw nearly a third of their fighters were tired after having ran from the river to the capital in a span of 2 hours. A journey which would usually take 8 hours. While the veterans looked a bit tired, they were still ready enough to fight. The same could not be said of their most inexperienced and youngest fighters, who looked ready to fall less. Now they had to lay a siege to the strongest city of the world with such a force. Still, Tajima knew he could not make Madara's choices for him, or the boy would never learn how to lead. His victories or losses should be made on his decisions and not on Tajima's instructions. Still, he wished the boy would show restraint in the future. While it was true Naruto's life was in danger, the boy was not alone. He had 500 of their most loyal bannermen with him who would defend him to their death should the daimyo make any move against him. But Madara didn't listen, his love for his brother overriding his rational sense of properly leading his army. Despite the tactical error, Tajima could not openly blame the boy because it would be hypocrisy, as he would be doing the same thing as Madara if it was Naori in Naruto's situation. Command any fighter in our army who has an aerial summon to call their beast. We shall send in a small force that will open the gates, commanded Madara. Shin Aburame demurely nodded in confirmation as he went out to find the said ninjas. Have the Kurama Fuinjutsu masters start working on disabling the seals on the city walls that prevents our ninjas from scaling them. If that fails, then we'll tear those bee walls apart, yelled Madara furiously. Hokage-sama, why are there no defenders arriving to stop us? Asked Rei Namikaze suspiciously. Madara glanced at the tall city walls and activated his Sharingan. It was true, there were no defenders manning even an inch of those walls. There should be an entire city garrison ready to greet his army on first sight. He closed his eyes and let his senses flow. At first there was nothing, but as he concentrated more he sensed the disturbance, the sound of steel clashing, the cries of the S&S. They are already attacking my brother, hissed Madara M. He turned towards his most loyal bannerman and saw the man look at him with full confidence. Tear these bee walls apart. And get me a damn bird, I'm going in, commanded Madara. Tajima quickly stepped forward to intervene. Madara, don't be hasty. Naruto can take care of himself for a while and you need to lead this army through this siege. Break the gates or scale the walls, whatever you do, don't abandon your forces to the task and rush in like that, chastised Tajima. Yet even so he carefully chose his words in order to not diminish the authority of his son in front of all their allies. A siege will take too long to break. How can I leave my brother out there to asked Madara worriedly. Your love for your brother will be the end of you someday, Madara. Tajima desperately wanted to say those cruel words to his son for making such a grave mistake. But he had to restrain himself and think about how to convince Madara to act like a leader and not like a worried elder brother. It's not going to be a siege, Hokage-sama, whispered Rei Namikaze. Madara and Tajima both turned around to see what had made the Namikaze leader go so pale. The voice reached them first before the sight. The Uchiha leadership and their 10,000-strong army could only watch in dismay as thousands of horses broke out of the forest. all of them carrying the royal banners, but it was the one leading them that made them shiver. A deer. In the thousands of years of clan wars, numerous attempts had been made by both Uchiha and Senju to gain the loyalty of one clan by force, negotiations, bribe and threats. Every attempt had ended in utter failure. No matter their power, numbers or skilled warriors, no Uchiha or Senju clan head had ever been able to bring this clan to their knees. It became an impossible task when the said clan swore loyalty to the daimyo and received his protection, leaving them out of the grasp of their enemies. They were not the strongest fighters of the world, but they had a power not even Tajima could dismiss. The Uchiha clan head clenched his fist when he saw Dane Nara at the head of this army that only seemed to grow larger and larger as more and more royal fighters came running out of the forests. At least 5,000 samurai cavalry, 3,000 archers, 12,000 infantry, and another 6,000 or so bunch of mixed fighters carrying the emblems of shogun or mercenary armies. Among this vast sea of royal forces, there were also nearly 4,000 Nara fighters rushing towards the battlefield. It was a trap and they all fell for it. Tajima bitterly smiled at the ingenuity of the man he was here to depose. From one hand he offered a choice of S, and with his other he prepared a sword to S into the hearts of his enemies should they refuse. The said sword was the entire royal army led by the Nara clan that now surrounded the enemies of the royal family. Naori glanced at her brother in alarm. Even if she was not a military strategist, her eyes could see the 10,000-strong Uchiha army was now facing a 30,000-strong royal army of the daimyo led by one of the most feared clans of the world. They literally had their backs against the wall facing an enemy that outnumbered them 3-1, which was not taking into account the summoning creatures that would be unleashed, the nasty tricks the Naras would definitely play, or the possibility of the city defenders striking them from the back. The Uchiha army was now trapped between the hammer and the anvil. Madara's face was blank for several long moments, even as his supporters looked at him for an order. And then the newly appointed Hokage smirked. Naori shivered when Madara unleashed his sword and gunbai at the same time. Following his lead, almost every Uchiha who all loved Madara unleashed their weapons, forcing their allies to do the same. She looked at Tajima to stop this madness, for no matter their skill or courage, they would all be here to the last man because of the sheer numbers the enemy had brought with them. But then she realized they had already rebelled against the daimyo. If they surrendered right now, their fate would be worse than death. She looked at the capital and could only pray for the safety of her trapped nephew, because it didn't look like they would be able to help him anytime soon, if ever. Not even Kami could save them from the doom, but it didn't stop Naori from unleashing her own sword as Madara charged forward and was joined by thousands of his forces. "Let's show these weaklings how to dance," barked Madara with a laugh, his battlelust taking him over. While the Uchihas understood the joke and laughed like their leader, their allies could only hesitantly prepare themselves as the enemy army started to spread out in order to encircle them. Both armies were now rushing towards each other in a mighty clash that would soon change the course of history for either side. Until thousands of warriors from both sides lost their balance as a massive tremor passed across the land. The next moment there was a monstrous sound of a horrible explosion which instantly shrouded the entire battlefield in dust and smoke. Madara and Tajima stopped each other from falling. When they were sure of their footing, they looked at their rear from where the explosion had come from. The entire area near the city walls was now shrouded in dust and debris. However, Madara with his Sharingan saw what others didn't, and he froze. His shock was soon past among his family and entire army alike. Even the enemy forces that were previously confident of their victory now started taking several steps back in horror. As the dust cleared, a mighty roar shook the entire landscape. A roar which had not been heard in 1,000 years. Naori fell to her knees as she saw the monstrous shadow step out of the dust. The first thing everyone noticed was its sheer size and demonic eyes that glared at all of them as if they were pesky insects. Its massive 9 tails were unleashed in every direction, threatening to crush this entire land with one swing. But what brought nearly half of both armies to their knees was not the beast's size, but the unending hatred and anger that threatened to burn them all in a never-ending inferno. "I don't believe it all this time," whispered Tajima in awe. Madara was the first to catch sight of a shining glint on top of the beast with his Sharingan. He could never fail to recognize that sword, nor could he not recognize the man in golden armor bearing the dragon on his versus. The lone warrior was glaring at the royal army. "A Biju," whispered Naori in fear. Naruto. Madara's declaration shocked each and every clan head and ninja alike as they all now saw the youngest son of Tajima standing atop the massive nine-tailed fox. And his eyes were as cold as ice. They all watched the young dragon raise his sword and point it straight at the stunned form of Dane Nara, the enemy commander. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. The reply from the Royal Army commander would be pondered over by historians for several centuries, because instead of doing what most would expect from a Nara in this situation, Dane picked himself up from the ground and grabbed a nearby sword, calmly pointing it straight at Naruto. Nor would any historian or shinobi alike ever forget the young dragon's words. Charge, Kurama. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.